Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Deep Discourse podcast. Um, this is a podcast where we're going to do a brief, uh, each session is going to be a brief journey and discourse into the Old Testament, New Testament. We're going to delve into some characters in the Bible a little bit deeper, maybe than others. We're going to look at characters like Abraham. Um, we're going to look at Jacob, known as the hill grabber. He's known as the hill grabber because it's said that the name Jacob means deceiver and or specifically heel grabber, which means to kind of get over on somebody. So we look at characters like that. So needless to say, David and some of his shenanigans and great things that he did all the way down to the times of Jesus and our Savior and some of the things that he did for the people that he interacted with. But we're going to take some slightly different, maybe tones, and kind of look from a little bit of a different lens than maybe some people might be used to. Some people might be used to that. But this particular introduction is just to kind of just record this video to kind of help prepare the hearts and minds of our listeners, to help you kind of understand and not blindside you, but so you can understand what our podcast is going to be about and how we're going to just basically just come from, take you on this journey of maybe taking a magnifying glass into Hebrew culture, because that's going to be something we're going to heavily kind of talk about, because what we're trying to do here is, understand a biblical text that was originally written in the Hebrew language, and even further down to Jesus, a Hebrew rabbi, with his 12 followers. So I think in order to understand and get a better understanding of these, major characters and major influences in our lives, I think it's important to understand the Hebrew literature and text. So, like I said, the discourse is going to kind of be focused on these different areas. Andrew, did you want to add to this beginning area?
Yeah, I would just say, thinking back to some of our conversations, some of our first conversations, when we first talked about doing a podcast, the question I asked myself is, why do it, right? Because there are books written about different Christian topics. There are plenty of different ministers as well. Well, we had to, so you could find hundreds, thousands of different sermons from thousands, a number of different parts about the Bible. So then my question initially to myself was, why add our voice to this larger conversation? And I want to come in and partner with you. This is because, and this is something I shared with you previously, but some of the things that we're going to cover will go into areas that often aren't discussed in common language.
Andrew,
I will say that in my time of being a believer, I've heard hundreds of different sermons, but not too many on some of these Old Testament texts, like the minor prophets, what's called the minor prophets, Hosea, Haggai, Habakkuk, so on. Some of these sermons on Deuteronomy. So as you mentioned, we'll go through a lot of the familiar territory and also go into the New Testament, which is probably what's most familiar within the broader. But I think what motivated me to join in with you on this project was wanting to bring some of these passages, books that are less familiar, into common conversation. Because the only time I get to read about some of these things is when reading academic texts published by seminary professors. So, but we want to bring these things into the broader Christian conversation. For those of us who aren't seminary students, but just love God and want to learn about God, and who initially find some of these passages obscure or irrelevant, we will make common conversation, trusting that there's value in studying all the Bible comprehensively So just wanted to mention that.
Definitely, Andrew. I think you were coming in a little with a little bit of background noise and static, but I think we're good now. So we're gonna just keep going and keep the ball rolling. Yeah, I'm just excited about this podcast. I think we wanted to kind of open up 2023, really kind of taking on this project. And like Andrew said, we're not, in any way biblical scholars. This is so in a similar way that we're trying to help you, to kind of maybe take a different look, and maybe you're already there, but for those that may not have kind of gotten to that place where they're looking at the scriptures from and trying to understand it from maybe the Hebrew biblical, historical perspective. I think we want to kind of help you to kind of see maybe some of that. Hopefully, some of the things we have to say and why we are advocating for that. Maybe hopefully some of that stuff is gonna just make sense to you and make you do a little more deep dive into the Hebrew beginnings in the Hebrew literature. Andrew, can you hear me okay? Oh, okay, I didn't. Okay, there I am. I think you can hear me now. But yeah, so without further ado, I think we'll just jump into the text. So we'll start in the NET. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. We'll start in the NKJV. In Genesis 1, verse 1 through 5. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light and that it was good. God divided the light from darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So in the evening and the morning were the first day. I'm going to also switch over and I'm going to read from the NET as well. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was without shape and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the watery deep. But the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the water. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good. So God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening and there was morning, marking the first day. I think it's fitting that that we start here because it's the beginning of this podcast. This was the first day, and I think that it's important to just take some time to just kind of sit in the first few chapters of the Bible, because I think these first few chapters and verses are key and profound to understanding the Bible and not just kind of rushing and moving forward. Because I think what happens is we don't necessarily catch what God may be trying to communicate with us in this first few verses. And I like what Team Mackey shares, particularly about these first few verses. And he says, and you can check out Tim Mackey's YouTube videos, and he's also a content creator. I believe he's a pastor, and he teaches extensively on biblical text and in Hebrew. And I'll put some links to some of his videos. And I'll also mention some other sources that we, used and learned from in the past at the end of the video. But specifically what Tim Mackey focuses on, he says that some of the audiences that he's spoken to, they kind of range in the different ways that they understand this scripture or this beginning verses. And a lot of people, I know, for particular, I fall into the group where as you begin to read, you start to imagine um, God forming the earth, and even before he forms it, his spirit kind of hovers over the waters, over the darkness. Um, and I love the King James version because I think a lot of people might come from that angle of, oh, it was dark. Um, God's spirit is moving like the wind, is hovering over the waters, he's flying, and all these other things that we may imagine based on our own thoughts and based on our own experiences. And so another thing that I think he says another group falls into looking at a glob, a dark circle, and even the idea of a circle is a new idea, a new concept that that we might not necessarily ascribe to I would say humanity and people maybe several centuries ago. They might have not have had that thought. So I would say like the idea of the circle is less than, according to Tim Mackey and some of things that he said. And I think from what we all can agree on, that it's less than a century old, that idea of looking at the earth and thinking of it as a globe or a circle, because humans didn't start exploring space till about the 50s and the 60s. So thinking about it from that standpoint, you have to think back to, okay, what was the author trying to communicate to the audience that he was speaking to? And I think we have to really kind of think about that question right there. What was he trying to communicate? This writer that was writing several centuries ago, over 1,000 years ago, what was he trying to communicate? So, Andrew, did you want to kind of add to that?
Yeah, I would say that when I read this and the first couple of chapters of Genesis as a whole, I think it demonstrates that God is a very intentional being, that he has plans. It demonstrates that in a simple way. The reason why I say that is because within the Christian community, our general assumption is that God is omnipotent. And I think that's also assumed in the other prominent monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, that God is omnipotent, that he's created all things. So if he's omnipotent, he obviously could have snapped his fingers and everything could have come into being as we know it to be now. All of humankind could have come into being, and all the earth into being as we know it now, if he wanted to go that way. But we see here a progression, starting with him creating the earth and it being dark, and then creating light, and then separating land from the water. So there's some kind of plan, some kind of intentionality there. And I think that demonstrates that God's ways aren't as our ways, that his logic, his rationale isn't by default ours. Especially for us as human beings, we often will try to go about things the quickest way possible. Like, what is the quickest way that I can accomplish something? And if God is omnipotent, the quickest way that something can be accomplished is for it to all happen at once. He can make it all happen at once. But he doesn't do that. He has this progression here. So it, I think in a sense, demonstrates, again, God's intentionality, that his approach isn't necessarily ours, and that he's more than just a force of nature, right? That there's some plan, some path that he goes about doing things. So I think it helps in spurring curiosity further into the character and personality, the being of God, and his plans. And as much as he reveals to us why he executes his plans in the way that he does. So I appreciate that about this first part of Genesis.
Definitely. I think I think before we go here, I think Andrew, you make some really good points, and I was trying to think back to a psalm. It says that, since the beginning of the creation of the world, we we can see, obviously, um, there's only a handful of people that have been there from, obviously God has been there in, some of the first creation. But the author basically says that, we can see God's, intentionality. We can see his handiwork. We can see, just by looking at the sky, by looking at his creation, seeing what God has done, seeing, sorry, Andrew, you might not have heard where I started, but just seeing what God has done from his creation, seeing, looking at the skies, looking at the stars, seeing God's intentionality and, what he was trying to do, what he was trying to communicate to us through what he has made. And that we can see his hand. It doesn't look like something that just happened by happenstance, And so um, I'm gonna just, before I go too deep into that tangent, I'm gonna say that the goal of this podcast is not necessarily to answer some scientific questions, maybe that we might have, that we might think the Bible might address, or maybe even some geographical questions, uh, maybe historical details that we're looking for. Um, we're not going to necessarily focus on that here in this, podcast, in our discourse. Our main thing is to kind of talk through, what is this love letter saying? What is God trying to communicate to us as humans? What was the Hebrew writer who was writing these things? What was God inspiring him to say to us? And I think that's why I think I began it in the beginning to say that it's important that we kind of have a general, very maybe surface understanding of Hebrew and how Hebrew literature works, and some of maybe the literary tools that are used by Hebrew authors. Um, like I said, we'll definitely plug in some resources that we've used to kind of get some better understanding about the Hebrew language, the culture, and maybe some of the things that were going on during the times of these authors and audiences that might have been listening when it was first uh, discussed and written. Um, I think particularly, in the text, this I'll say this live video is not gonna necessarily address. We're not gonna jump too deep into the text to kind of see like what the scriptures are saying, but what we will do is or what we are trying to do here is, I should say, is just trying to prepare the hearts and minds of people to understand what we'll be doing in the podcast, and that we come from a place where we believe that scriptures are authoritative, and that it's God's word to man, and it's an inspired word. It's God's word. We truly believe that, and I believe that Andrew believes the same thing. Um, and so, and that's kind of the standpoint that we're coming from. We've accepted that as what we believe, but we're not discouraging anybody that might not necessarily believe that from listening. But we just want to prepare your hearts and minds that we're coming from that standpoint, that this is God's authoritative word. So yeah, so I think that kind of sums up some of the main things that we want to talk about. Um, I think myself and Andrew, we've discussed kind of, you know, at length what it means for God to, write something specific. And since we're made in God's image, if we wanted to communicate something specific to a friend, maybe through a letter, we would write about that thing. Like, hey, my dog wasn't feeling good. He had this type of ailment. You know him, you know his name, Robinson, my dog. He wasn't doing well. I was really sad when that happened. Just different things that we might say in our letter to our friend, talking about our dog and what was going on with our dog, and how it made us sad, and maybe the dog didn't make it. We're going to talk through those things, but that's going to be the focus of the letter. The letter is not going to be talking about other things, whether it's maybe somebody we met at the supermarket, unless they specifically have something to do with our dog, or even what kind of soap we used to take a bath that morning. So I like to joke about, maybe what oil I used to rub on my bald head. I'm not gonna talk about that. So I'm like, what makes my bald head shine and gives me a little more sheen. I'm probably not gonna talk about that in the letter. But the main topic, or even what I'm gonna be delving into in the letter, is gonna be about my dog. So I don't know if Andrew, if you wanted to kind of talk about that or add some more shenanigans to what I've stated.
I'll say that you care for your head quite well. Whatever you're using, you do it well. So I'll say that. But I think the only other thing I'd say, just in brief, is I think we'll see this further as we dig into other passages. One beautiful thing that we see here in Genesis is God. We see him not just as a logical being, but also in a sense as an artist. I think within art, we have the freedom of expression. It's not wholly constrained by intention. So if I'm an artist and I paint a beautiful landscape one day, then the next day paint it's understood that me being art, just me being this expression is a reflection of who I am. Or if I make a certain type of song in one style one day and make a different song in another style, I don't have to give some logical explanation. Why did you paint this landscape? Why did you paint this portrait? It's understood that this is an expression of my thoughts, an expression of my feelings, and it's an expression of myself. And again, it's not constrained by some kind of intentionality or logic. And this artistic expression of personality gives me personhood. That helps separate me from being just some logical being that but without that artistic expression would likely look like a robot. So I think these types of passages help give that that personhood to God, where we look like artistic expression, and it's not constrained by some logic that we would apply to it, but it's just God doing what he wants to do in the way that he wants to do it. The same way that we do that whenever we create some kind of art form, we're given that freedom to express ourselves. We see that in God, and it makes it so much easier for us to build a personal relationship with him, because we see him expressing himself as a divine person, divine and sovereign person. So
absolutely. And it's interesting that you said that, because I think earlier you alluded to even a Muslim, or somebody that maybe practices Judaism, and how they look at as God as an omnipotent being, even more so than, but even us as human beings who are flawed and who are not omnipotent. I think even us as humans, we can get a pretty good grasp on what it means to be a potter. And I think that word and pottery, I think that we're going to definitely delve into that further in the next episodes that we're going to do, because I want you guys to be thinking about that, because and what Adam means, and the relationship that Adam, even that name, has to pottery. And so I definitely think that that's a profound point, because God is the potter, essentially. We are the clay, and he works with that. And if he As if you study pottery and you think about clay, if a potter makes something and it doesn't, turn out to be the shape that he wants, sorry, Andrew, but if the potter makes something and it's not the shape of what he wants it to be, he has every right to say, okay, I'm going to start over. I'm going to make it back into clay and remold whatever it is I'm trying to make, so until it fits the shape of what I want it to be before it, before it hardens. So if we look from that standpoint, I think that is a great place to kind of be and to have our mindset kind of, be at, so we can understand how to understand the scriptures a little bit better, because we can kind of surrender to, okay, this is what he's trying to do, this is what he's communicating, as opposed to kind of come in with our own maybe background thoughts and notions of what it should say. We kind of listen for what is this text trying to communicate to us. So I think that's about everything we wanted to share. I think some resources, I know we did promise that we would share some resources. So I would say for me, definitely Tim Mackey comes to mind. Like I said, I'll put his link in the description. Another group that I like to listen to, they're called LF Beta. They have a app and they also have a website. But they speak Hebrew on the podcast as well as on the app, and they are reading the text from the Hebrew version that they have, and trying to understand what was going on in this particular story. So I would definitely recommend Aleph Beta with Rabbi David Foreman, and a host of others, Emu Shalev, some other individuals that are just very good at kind of deducing what the scriptures are saying from the Hebrew point of view and giving us kind of that microscopic view into that world. Another reference I would definitely say is Marty Solomon. I think he does a great job, fantastic job in just walking people through from Genesis all the way to even Revelation. And he does a fantastic job of, even look into biblical history. And Andrew, if you had any resources that you wanted to plug in, please go for it.
I think that you provide a lot of excellent resources. I guess the quick thing I'd say is that thankfully we are in the information age where you can find so many different sources of information on any topic, and you can find reviews. So I found some websites where there's different commentaries listed that are used in the academic world by the professional theologians, and on some of those websites, other theologians or students in seminary will write those commentaries. So there's essentially Yelp pages for biblical commentary. There's actually one website I found called Best Commentaries, if I recall that name correctly. So you can even Google Best Biblical Commentaries and find websites that will give ratings on that from other scholars. So the resources are abundant, and even ratings on the resources are available as well. So the only thing that we need, that we may sometimes lack, is curiosity, but there is no shortage of information, just sometimes a shortage of curiosity. So that's all I'll say.
And with that, we're going to sign off, guys. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Discourse this week. Have a very happy New Year, and a fantastic 7 days to everybody. Yeah.